Let's talk about Israel, because the biggest news of the week has obviously been this.
This morning, the worst violence in years between Israelis and Palestinians is intensifying. Israel's military attacked new targets in Gaza, the Palestinian territory where militants are firing hundreds of rockets into Israel. And in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Palestinian protesters fought with police.
Since Monday, over 80 Palestinians have been killed and 7 Israelis in this tit-for-tat war.
Okay, there is a lot to unpack there, from the horror of the situation, which has escalated significantly since then, to the use of the phrase tit-for-tat war in a conflict where you just pointed out one side has suffered over 10 times the casualties.
No
Something
shit.
which speaks to both the severe power imbalance at play here and how that often gets obscured by how we choose to talk about it. And look, if
America is extremely guilty of like absolutely demonizing all of Palestine and Muslims in general and supporting Israel blindly. I mean, I believe we helped stand them up originally. I mean, Israel was created after World War II. It's a whole complicated thing. For Jewish refugees, because the world was so anti-Semitic, there was nowhere else for them to go. No other country was willing to take in Jewish refugees after World War II because the whole world was anti-Semitic, just not as anti-Semitic as Germany, more or less. But there was a lot of mistrust and negative propaganda around Jewish people at the time. So, like, this definitely... Palestine is under attack. Muslims are under attack. The religion of Islam is under attack over there. And they're being persecuted. They're being singled out. And they're being discriminated against. And for some reason, we have so many people over here blindly supporting Israel.
you are not fluent in Middle East history, I know this can seem overwhelming. The latest chapter in a long story you haven't read. So I'm not going to try and recap the history here, or indeed propose a solution, although interestingly, I do have one, because someone with this accent always thinks they can fix things in the Middle East. I redrew the map a bit, and I have a lot of misplaced confidence that it would work very well. But this week's actually been a pretty good reminder that while some things are incredibly complex and require a great deal of context, others are just wrong.
Yeah.
For instance, one of the incidents that's been a flashpoint, the planned expulsion of Palestinians who've lived in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood for generations. It's currently tied up in the Israeli court system with the foreign...
They were literally given these homes decades and decades ago. They have lived here for generations, and now all of a sudden Israel's decided, nope, we want this land, we want these buildings back, get out. It's absolutely disgusting. In no way is it right, in no way is it moral. And this is what I mean by for some reason, some people are blindly supporting Israel. One side is being singled out. One side is being bullied. One side is being, like, literally just cornered. Like, just absolutely it's fucking awful. And for people to be like, you know, the people of Palestine are the problem, the people of Palestine are the bullies or the instigators, it's absolute horseshit. Shows they know nothing about what's actually going on currently or in general, and shows a little of their, like, anti-Muslim, honestly. Like, it's just like you are not looking into the situation at all. Like, you're hearing Muslim, you're thinking of everything America's told you to associate with Muslims, and you're assuming they're in the wrong. That is such a ridiculous viewpoint. It's such a ludicrous argument that somehow has just got more and more traction over the years. And so many people are walking around with this preconceived notion that, like, Muslims can only do wrong, to the point where they'll blindly support awful shit like this. You know? That's what's truly disgusting. Like, it's gotten to a point where this is evil. This is evil happening right in front of all of us. And there's so many of us that are watching this evil and saying, like, at least someone's doing it. That's fucking disgusting.
Ministry calling it a real estate dispute. But it's worth knowing that the UN's Commissioner for Human Rights has said that these expulsions would violate Israel's obligations under international law. So it is not hard to see why sanitized terms like evictions or property disputes rankle those who live there.
You grew up in the neighborhood, your family home is slated for eviction. What is the scene right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. To start, it's not really an eviction. It's forced ethnic displacement, to be accurate. Eviction does not imply the hundreds and hundreds of heavily armed police and army and settlers polluting, blowing up your doors, throwing your children from your windows, and using brute force to throw you out in the street and assaulting and arrest you should you resist. It doesn't imply the grenades. It doesn't imply the rubber-coated bullets.
Right. The threat of eviction is accurate only in a very superficial level, in that one day you live somewhere, the next day you don't, and that change wasn't your choice. But
That's
it doesn't
so
tell
evil.
the whole story. It's like running a headline that says, Matt Gaetz reaches out to Florida youth. Sure, not inaccurate, but it's missing some pretty crucial details about the exact nature of that interaction. And look, it is true that militants from Palestinian groups like Hamas fired over 1,000 rockets towards Israel this week, and that is reprehensible. But, and I realise this is the most load-bearing conjunction in history, but the majority of those rockets thankfully didn't reach their target for a very clear reason.
The casualties and the damage would have been greater, but for Israeli interceptor rockets, the so-called Iron Dome, which blew most of the incoming missiles to pieces.
Which I'm pretty sure we helped stand up for them.
Israel has a so-called Iron Dome, and I know, what if we blew up the rockets with more rockets? Sounds like something someone drunkenly wrote down on a napkin once, but it is a real military defense system that really works. And I also know not all the rockets were shot down. Israeli civilians were killed this week, which is terrible. But the point is, this isn't tit for tat. There is a massive imbalance when it comes to the two sides' weaponry and capabilities. While most of the rockets aimed toward Israeli citizens this week were intercepted, Israel's airstrikes were not. They hit their targets, including a house in a refugee camp, a building housing the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, and this 13-story office and apartment building. And while Israel insisted that there were military targets in that building and that they destroyed it as humanely as possible, even warning people to evacuate beforehand, for the record, destroying a civilian residence sure seems like a war crime, regardless of whether you send a courtesy heads-up text. And when dozens of people have seen their homes or livelihoods destroyed, it doesn't really help that the Israeli military posted this triumphant meme showing the explosion and the rubble labeled before and after. Look what we did. People lived there before, and now they can't. You get it, right? And obviously, in general, you should probably never meme a war crime.
I am absolutely floored. What is up, GJ Samps09? Sorry, I'm like absolutely fucking floored right now at the idea that the Israeli military created a meme out of their bombing target. The utter disregard for human life, especially given the target was a residential area. And yeah, a war crime. Holy shit, dude. Who wants to side with that?
But if you absolutely have to, at least go with something less boring than the before-after template. Maybe use the Drake meme or the disaster girl. There's a building coming down, so checkmark already there. And it's a little girl with eyes that scream, I don't know what the Geneva Conventions are.
I love John Oliver
too. The more I think about it, it works perfectly. The fact is, the citizens of Gaza don't have an Iron Dome to protect them the way that the citizens of Israel do.
Yeah,
it's one
Gaza
of the
got
many
hit
ways they're at a
80, 90
significant
times.
disadvantage. Although an Israeli military
80, 90 people
spokesperson
died.
tried to push back on the idea that there's really much of a discrepancy there.
Somebody on Twitter said that the Palestinians don't have an Iron Dome. I say yes, they have an Iron Dome. It's called Don't Fire Rockets at Israeli Civilians, and we won't fire anything at Gaza.
Yeah, but there are a couple of differences.
The fuck, dude?
Iron Dome, for one, sounds much cooler. And also, it has the significant advantage of being an actual defense system that exists, unlike Gaza's, which is mostly try not to be where the bombs are landing. And it's important to note here the vast majority of the Palestinians in Gaza are not part of Hamas. They don't get together and all decide to launch rockets. It's not a fucking co-op board. But when Israel fires rockets at Gaza, it endangers all Palestinians there. Maybe somebody on Twitter could point that out to that guy. To people in Gaza, it can seem like the only time anyone pays attention to what's happening there is when Hamas is firing rockets, which is understandably very frustrating because they've been living under a suffocating blockade for 14 years. And in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories,
and they don't even have electricity. They don't even have
in
Gaza. They don't even have electricity most hours of the day. They don't have running water most hours of the day. They it's fucking ridiculous what these people have been subjected to for so long, and now being bombed on top of not allowed to have certain goods, not even getting the electricity and water you fucking need to live for over a decade at least. Oh my god, it is ridiculous to me. It is similar to the argument that people make about there's absolutely fucking nothing you can say to me that will ever justify putting children in cages at ICE facilities, or even their parents, or separating them. Absolutely not a single fucking thing you could ever say to me to justify that. It's wrong, it's evil, it's unnecessary, and it's just disgusting. This is the same principle. The people in Gaza are just fucking being beaten over and over again, and now they're launching bombs on them, and everyone's like, that's what they fucking get. What? There's nothing you can say to justify this. It is absolutely evil. It is disgusting. It is unnecessary, and it is repulsive. A top-tier military versus a nation that doesn't have water or electricity. What the fuck? What is that? Exactly. It's a fucking... It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. And the only thing that's so frustrating to me is how many people are blindly standing with Israel. And I say blindly because I've been seeing lots of people on social media, my personal social media, of course, standing with Israel. But I know, and I can tell by either what they're saying, what they're sharing, or the general post, they haven't looked into things or aren't aware of the situation. Or at least I genuinely hope that's the case. Because if they are... How? How do you look at that and say, I like that? I just don't fucking get people sometimes, dude.
Apartheid, an assessment echoed by both international and Israeli human rights groups. Life in Gaza,
I don't know, but they do.
Hard,
I mean, we're seeing a lot of Jewish Americans support Israel, and that's a complicated situation because they're gonna default there as usual because that's kind of where their loyalty lies, where their home country is. And you think we've received propaganda of how bad Palestine is. Just imagine if you were in a Jewish community, what it would be like. The propaganda would be even more so. And we also see a surprising amount of government officials standing for Israel. Well, I say surprising because I would hope that they'd be decent, but I guess it's not surprising because they never are. And the U.S. government has a long history of being allies with Israel, working with Israel, helping Israel, standing up Israel, and setting up a lot of their things. So, I'm pretty sure we worked with Israel to deploy the first worm and Stuxnet into the Iranian nuclear facilities back in the 80s, 90s? If I'm not mistaken, we worked with the Israeli government to develop that process, or develop that worm, and also come up with the deploying method and monitor things. It was a whole thing.
Being bombed, and the US government has implicitly co-signed on the brutally hard line Israel's been taking. This guy basically gave Israel a green light to do anything it wanted for the last 4 years, and while Biden has had the opportunity to reset that relationship,
his not done shit.
Response this week has been deeply underwhelming, giving a generic statement that Israel has a right to defend itself,
which they're not doing. That's exactly what I'm fucking talking about. Israel has a right to defend itself. Defend itself from what? What the fuck are you talking about? What? From what? The starving people with no water and power who are just trying to live a life? Surrounded by people who treat them like shit? Who don't launch bombs until you kill and level their residential buildings and civilians and fucking refugee camps? Like, you're literally committing war crimes on a desperate area and desperate people, and then like we're over here saying like, well, they have the right to defend themselves. That's ridiculous. Jesus Christ.
That Bush said before him. Israel has a right to defend itself is just something all presidents end up saying out loud at some point in office, like, my fellow Americans, or, what do you mean there are no aliens? This is some bullshit. And look, it's not that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself, it's just that line cannot be used to excuse absolutely everything. Multiple children have been killed this week, 8 in a single strike just yesterday, and the US is heavily implicated here. Not just by serving as Israel's diplomatic shield at the UN, but by constantly refusing.
Oh, well, you know, the CIA has actually taken some big steps this week. So has the government in general. They confirmed, you know, UFOs a little while back. They have also, in the same CIA disclosed documents, you know what, I'll just pull it up. CIA.gov. Oh, whoops. All right, CIA.gov. Here we are. Resources. Okay. CIA disclosed UFO documents. CIA, UFO, fact or fiction, is this it? I don't know if that's it. UFO documents, National Security Agency. Maybe this is it. German scientists are flying discs. Yeah, okay, so yeah. These are pretty much everything they have. I've heard there were documents released in a minute. Oh yeah, I looked at them right when they happened. Yeah, this was a few years ago, but yeah, this is when they released everything from their information. There was also stuff about astral projection, if I remember right. Astral projection. Soviet. Read the magazine, reading. I know I read it once. CIA astral projection gateway document. Here we go. Your task to provide an assessment of gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As said, I fulfill tasking, spoon it clear. I know this is a fucking tangent, but yeah, here's where they go into details about the use and possibility and details of astral projection, how it's somewhat of an extraterrestrial activity or phenomena. I don't know if it was learned from them or what. I mean, it's hard to say with any of this shit, right? But sure. Oh, okay, they're talking about a wormhole right here. Yeah, okay. Right? They've got to be talking about a wormhole, because if you have a black hole and the white hole repels all gravity, black hole sucks in all gravity. What you end up happening is you can get sucked in via the black hole, but once you get too close, the white hole's going to repel you out. Is that what they're talking about? Taurus, nucleus, white hole. Nucleus, you're interesting me with that. Galactic North, our galaxy. I'm going to have to read through this again sometime. I mean, who knows what the fuck they're saying? But yeah, that's def a thing.
To criticize the indefensible. Watch as just this week, a State Department spokesman desperately tried to equivocate when asked a pretty simple question.
I want to ask you on Israel, I don't want to harp on this either, but, you know, the Israelis killed 13 people just now, you know, including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that? Do you condemn the killing of children?
Saeed,
I'm asking, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand, I was just speaking to the team, I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are just emerging. Obviously, the deaths of civilians, be they Israeli or Palestinians, are something we would take very seriously.
Holy shit, he just
Would take seriously, but not stand against? It's a war crime. What the...
just asked you, is child murder bad? This really isn't hard. Just say yes.
Yeah.
The only scenario in which the answer to is killing children wrong gets tricky is if you're a time traveler in 1890s Austria trying to explain why you just killed the Hitler family's bouncing new baby boy. I know how this looks, but trust me, it is complicated.
It is complicated.
There is a real tendency, particularly in America, to both sides this situation, and I'm not saying that there aren't some areas where that's warranted, but it's important to recognize there are also areas where it's simply not. Both sides are firing rockets, but one side has one of the most advanced militaries in the world. Both sides are suffering heartbreaking casualties, but one side is suffering them exponentially. And it's not like the US is operating from the moral high ground here. It's obviously no stranger to drone striking weddings and saying, we were just trying to target enemy combatants. This country has blood on its hands too. And look, if you believe Israel's actions are warranted and proportionate this week, you're welcome to try and make that argument.
Yeah.
But we have got to start having this conversation honestly, and falling back on convenient sanitized terms like real estate disputes and airstrikes on militants feels a little disingenuous when what you're describing is forcing people from the homes they've lived in for decades and killing civilians and children. And again, none of this frees Hamas from responsibility, but Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians, just as what Israel is doing right now doesn't represent all Israelis or indeed Jewish people. Lots is complicated here, but some things are pretty simple. One side is suffering much more.
Yeah.
If America really wants to help, it might want to seriously consider changing its long-held position here, because for decades, the backbone of America's policy in the Middle East has been that America is an unwavering friend to Israel, which is a great thing to try and be, but at the end of the day, I would hope that a real friend would tell me when I'm being an asshole, and definitely when I'm committing a fucking war crime.
John Oliver for president? He can't be. John Oliver can never be our president because he wasn't born here. He's not a natural U.S. citizen.